What if I told you America itself built China into its biggest rival? Technologically, economically, and militarily. It may sound absurd, a complete blunder on America's part, but it was due to Cold War desperation to crush Soviet Union, corporate greed, and idealistic hope to change China. But it backfired and turned China from an agrarian to world's leading economy, sitting on the precipice of overtaking United States.
That's the prediction.
So in this video, I want to share with you a story how American calculated gamble and a visionary Chinese leadership turned China into a superpower. To understand, we have to go back to a moment in 1972 when American President Richard Nixon made a historic visit to China during a time when America and China considered each other enemies. But why were enemies meeting each other? This moment, famously known as Sino-American rapprochement, was nothing short of a shock to the world. Because for over 20 years, China and America had been bitter enemies. It was because after Mao Zedong and Chinese Communist Party took over, the relation between the two countries collapsed, and America officially opposed CCP's rule in China. On the other hand, China and Soviet Union allied and formed a communist bloc. It was like war of the ideologies. America wanted to spread democracy and capitalism around the world, whereas Chinese and Soviets wanted to spread communism. And less than a year later, Korean War started in 1950, and as we can guess, Chinese and Soviets were supporting communism and US was supporting democracy and capitalism. Soon after, the communist bloc and US-UN forces clashed, and it was bloody, brutal, and it left scars that lasted decades. And US couldn't do much to the Soviets due to fears of dangerous escalation, as they were already involved in a Cold War and they both had nuclear weapons.
Russia has created an atomic explosion.
But the US had to do something to stop the China-Soviet alliance from getting stronger and spreading communism to the rest of the world, specifically to the US allies in Asia. So America responded with a strategy to contain one part of the communist bloc, China. So America did three things. First, it refused to recognize CCP as the legitimate government. Instead, it started treating Taiwan as the real China. Second, it cut off China from the outside world. No trade, no travel, no diplomatic ties. Third, it ringed China with alliances and military bases in East Asia, from Japan to South Korea to Philippines. But US didn't stop there. It also blocked China from entering United Nations, threatened nuclear strikes during the first Taiwan Strait crisis, and fought proxy wars in Vietnam, where the Chinese and Soviet support for the North Vietnam collided with America. In short, for more than 2 decades, the relation between China and US were severely strained, frozen, hostile, on the brink. But then, just like that, in 1972, with American President Richard Nixon's visit to China, things seemed as if they were suddenly normalized. But why? Why flip the script on your sworn enemy? The answer? The enemy of my enemy, Soviet Union. During the 1960s, 2 KGB spies defected to the US and reported a massive Soviet-China rift, including border clashes and the real potential for a full-blown war between the two communist giants. This was seen as a double opportunity by Nixon administration. First, US could use China as a counterweight against the Soviets. Second, by 1975, US lost nearly 58,000 soldiers against North Vietnamese forces. 500,000 more were stuck in a war that had no end in sight. The Soviets were quietly supporting North Vietnamese forces. The Chinese? They were openly supporting them, even sending troops into Vietnam. So Nixon's team saw an opening. If they could pull China away from Vietnam, they could pressure North Vietnam to come to the peace table and finally give America a way out. But what if America's engagement with China wasn't its own doing? What if it was China secretly pulling America's strings in the background. Michael Pillsbury, a US foreign policy advisor and China expert, claims in his book, The 100 Years Marathon, it wasn't really Nixon influencing China, but it was China influencing Nixon. Consider this, in 1985, a CIA employee was accused of decades of espionage where he provided classified US documents to the Chinese government. Either way, this shift in American foreign policy towards China was a turning point because it opened doors for China to access technology, investment, and global trade. But saying China's rise happened because of America's engagement would be half right, as it was also the result of a growing feeling inside the Chinese Communist Party that Mao's radical policies were dragging the country backwards. And they knew something had to change or China would crumble. After Mao's death in 1976, Deng Xiaoping stepped up in 1978, and he wasn't some new face. Deng was a veteran, a hero who fought alongside Mao during the Chinese Communist Revolution from 1927 to 1948. By the early 1950s, he had become a major policymaker in the Chinese foreign and domestic affairs. But Deng's ideas often clashed with Mao's. Deng believed in pragmatic economic reforms that gave room for individual initiative and self-interest. On the other hand, Mao pushed for strict collectivism, egalitarianism. He was more of an isolationist. This clash, it got Deng purged from the government and from the CCP party not once but twice. And yet, he came back because inside the CCP, there were many who sympathized with his ideas of reforming China. And as he came back, he pushed through the capitalistic reform that opened China to the rest of the world. Now tell me this, if we add America's foreign policy change towards China from containment to engagement and China's own economic reformation, what do we get? We get US barging in China with science and investment. Why? Well, it has to do with two things, Soviet Union and a bit of greed. So let's first talk about science. Deng understood that if China were to have a future economic surge, it would have to come from science and technology. And he knew that good relations with America were important in getting key technologies. On the other hand, Americans wanted an ally against Soviet Union, and that's exactly what Deng promised. So American President Jimmy Carter and Deng signed Science and Technology Agreement in 1979, the first big pact between the two nations. This deal sparked joint projects in energy, agriculture, health, even space, with the US sharing expertise on everything from nuclear safety to satellite data. Thousands of Chinese students and scientists flooded American universities, soaking up knowledge in engineering and medicine before heading home to build China's tech backbone. In result, China leapfrogged decades of isolation, laying the groundwork for its innovation boom that we see today. Think of it like the seeds for today's China, where we see companies like DeepSeek, Huawei, Tencent, Xiaomi, TikTok, BYD. These Chinese companies are going toe-to-toe with their American counterparts. And not only that, China is outpacing America in telecommunication technology like 5G and 6G. And it's taking steps to rival Americans in AI, quantum computing, even space program with plans to set up colonies on the moon and Mars. But it doesn't stop here. As Chinese were eager to access American technology, there was something that Americans were eager to access in China: money. Right after normalization of 1979, US corporations started lobbying to grant China the most favored nation status. Once done, giants like Boeing, General Electric, and Walmart pushed Congress for most favored nation renewals. And they didn't stop there. They got China's entry into World Trade Organization as well. And here there is something important to understand. The American government and policymakers held a core belief called modernization theory. Basically, it was a belief that deep economic integration would inevitably democratize China.
Do you believe there can ever be democracy in China?
I believe there can be, and I believe there will be.
And would turn it into a reliable ally, just like Japan, Korea, and even Taiwan. This idealistic hope was so strong that it persisted even after Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. Then Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the sole reason why US was engaging with China. Yet the policy of engagement not only survived, but it accelerated. The lobbyists understood America's hope to turn China into a democracy, and they pushed the democratization narrative. But one must ask, how was it about money? Well, China's cheap labor and overall low costs meant sky-high returns for the US businesses. And soon after China's entry into World Trade Organization, it gave US companies low tariffs and the ability to move their business to China. And then US businesses built factories, trained workers, and transferred key technical manufacturing knowledge. Slowly but surely, the production started moving from the US to China. This created jobs for the Chinese, but severance for the Americans, as America lost 5.9 million manufacturing jobs during the span of 1979 to 2007. It's worth mentioning that job automation also played its part, but still, this gave China the opportunity to absorb decades worth of modern manufacturing and supply chain knowledge, which further incentivized companies like Apple, Tesla, Intel, HP, Walmart, Nike to move their manufacturing to China. There's no consensus how many companies moved their manufacturing to China, but looking at this graph, we can see how America's manufacturing moved to China. And without China's strong manufacturing base, China's rise to the second largest economy,
China is the world's second largest economy,
would not have been possible. But the thing is, technology and economy gives you one more thing. According to historian Paul Kennedy, in his book, he says, all leading powers in the last 500 years had two things in common that turned them into a global or the superpower of the world: cutting-edge technology and booming economy. So these two forces combined give a nation the ability to build a dominant military to become a global superpower. And guess what? China has all the ingredients. US government's own report confirms that China's military capabilities are growing at an unprecedented pace, fueled by technological and massive investments aiming to challenge US dominance by mid-century. But here's a question: how could the United States be so wrong that it literally helped create their own biggest rival? But the thing is, right after Nixon's visit to China, CIA under Henry Kissinger assessed China's future potential. And the CIA produced one of the most stunning miscalculations. A declassified CIA 1974 document assessing China's future prospects states that by 2000s, China will remain a big poor nation. Yet in reality, by 2000s, it was the sixth largest economy with 8.6% growth rate. And not only that, it seems CIA even failed to realize that there was potential in China for an economic reformation. Michael Pillsbury, who worked under Nixon, says classified CIA briefings in 2001 asserted that there was no chance China would surpass the United States economically. Today, predictions indicate that China will surpass the US economically between 2030 to 2045, with its technological surpassing expected even sooner. Now, if it's gonna happen or it's not gonna happen, that's not important, but the perception about China surpassing America is there, and it's there in the government. Does this suggest America's policy of engagement with China was based on miscalculation? I'll let you be the judge. But the United States did provide a bridge for China to cross its century of humiliation and Mao Zedong's catastrophic revolution. I think on the America's part, it was a calculated risk born out of Cold War necessity. But I think most importantly, China played its part perfectly, where Deng Xiaoping's vision to reform China and his cutthroat diplomacy
Sino-US relations have reached a new beginning.
put China on the path to become a superpower. But did you know China is the reason behind Trump's obsession with Greenland? And interestingly, Putin's war on Ukraine explains why there are no aliens. You can watch both, but I'm thinking, which one are you going to watch first?